Good afternoon. These lights are bright. My name is Ben Carruthers-Watt, for those who don't know me, and I've got none of the answers, and I'm going to invite 5 people up who hopefully have all of the answers. We're going to talk about how you handle new members coming into a team and kind of the challenges involved. So, if you'd like to take your comfy seats, please. I believe most people know who Fabiola is. I wonder why. I couldn't say. We've got Steph Colvin from Dyson, Odd Andreasen from CERN, Danielle from VI Technologies, and Kabul from Renishaw. So hello everybody, and thank you for joining me. I'm just going to set the scene quickly, give a sort of hypothetical, typical situation of what we might be talking about, and then let everybody talk. So if you've got a team and you're doing LabVIEW as part of that team, you've sort of got 3 main goals that you want to do. Well, considering the 3 main goals. Standardization, it is the buzzword of the century at the minute. We all know why standardization is good, and a lot of people have talked about it previously. It helps you be efficient and be maintainable and all the rest of it. Productivity, you've actually got to do some work. Do I have to say any more than that? And finally, development, and this is more considering the personal development of your team members. It's not all about what your team is doing, but you've also got to think that everybody in your team has got to be developing personally. They've got to think their own career progression and where they're going to go in the future. I believe there's a balance of these 3 things, and I don't think that balance has an easy answer, hence why I invite 5 people to the stage to talk about the different conflicts of it. So if we consider 3 typical team members across the spectrum, photos have been used with permission for stereotypes. Thank you very much. The newbie. This person is very new to LabVIEW. They might have picked it up and dabbled and written a couple of VIs in their spare time. They almost certainly haven't done any training, and they definitely will need some training. The experienced user. They may have done some formal training. They may have got years of hands-on experience and are time served. This person can jump into a project and actually be really quite productive. And then there's the stick in the mud. I've used an old man for this because it is typically an old man. Actually, calling Tom an old man, he might get angry. This person sticks to their ways, but they are damn good at what they do. The problem with this person is they might not want to do things your way, but when they're doing things their way, they can be very productive and very efficient. And again, you can see how these sort of imbalances can cause problems.
We call them physicists.
Hello.
So the quote on screen, strong, light, cheap, pick 2. That's from Keith Bontrager, mountain bike engineer, rider, developer. It's quite a good adage. You kind of pick 3 things, but you can't have everything that you want. You tend to pick 2 of them and lose out on something else. I believe the same thing is actually true for my 3 points here. Productivity, development, and standardization. You tend to sacrifice one or more for the other. All the prepared questions I've got are focused around that point. So I'm going to start off with a couple of prepared questions. Feel free for audience questions, or just talk amongst yourselves. Sorry, that was badly timed.
No, I was just saying that we are already not agreeing. Like Danny and I went back like, no. Where you said that you have to pick 2 and leave 1. I actually think if you focus on personal development, you might get the other ones.
Yeah, they feed into each other.
Yeah.
Excellent. Care to divulge?
So, I mean, we had this discussion at the workshop. The definition of a good programmer needs to stop being the guy that does genius programming and it's in the corner and he's just coding and does this code that reads really fast, it runs and does what everybody asks for. My definition of a good programmer is the person that programs code that the average programmer can maintain. Software is a team sport, and if you are doing code that your team cannot maintain, you're not a good programmer. So if you start using that and shaming those guys that are so proud of being the genius programmer, hopefully we can get them to bring like 2 steps down from the highness.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, I have the same philosophy, and also we usually say in the team that LabVIEW is a language. We're a multinational organization, and we already have difficulties enough understanding what people are saying. And you have to speak a language that everybody understands. So that's the concept, just to keep things familiar, keep things standardized, and make sure that patterns that can be used.
Just to add to that, I think trying to convince those people that are stuck in the mud that their stuff needs to be used by those people right at the bottom, that is the key thing, and it's getting them to realise that the more they put themselves in a little isolated box, the more time they actually end up supporting the rest of the team. So if they actually went with the standardisation, they spent a lot less of their time with those newbies trying to resolve the problems that they've come across.
So yeah, along the same lines, really, if you're planning for obsolescence of yourself and trying to get people to work towards, and that's the definition of a good leader, is it not? Something like that? To say, if everything still works, if you're not around, that's a sign of a good leader. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. First pre-prepared question. This is something I talked about last night as well, actually. I'll read it, don't worry. So, an experienced user is going to be able to learn a lot from working inside an architecture. They're going to be able to look under the hood, see what tools are being, expand their horizons. It's something I've got experience with. But are they going to get a chance to put these new techniques they're learning into use if they are forced to work inside a fixed architecture?
We totally have this problem. We get people in that have LabVIEW experience, and then we've got quite a chaotic architecture at the moment. We're at the point where we're going to restart, use different tools. But at the moment, there is no way of those experienced developers actually developing in our architecture. And that is something we've seen, and so we're making a change to allow for that. We've made an architecture that is very asynchronous and impossible to debug unless you know the advanced debugging techniques. And therefore, it's not great for our newbies and even our experienced guys. So we're making that change to make our architecture work for everyone.
So just to put this a bit in context, so at CERN, we're about 34,000 registered users. There are about 10,000 people on site at all times, and of those, there are about 600 LabVIEW developers registered that we are supporting. In the team, we're from 15 to 25 people, depending on how much budget you get that year. And turnover is probably 30% of the team gets replaced every year. So that keeping people part is hard. So what we've realized over time is to get people to a certain level of proficiency is kind of hard. So we have to settle with maybe not going all the way, but finding something that we, within a reasonable time, can teach somebody so that they can go out in the field and work. And at the same time, we can manage to maintain. So it's always a challenge, sort of the trade-off between making someone really excellent and deep dive into LabVIEW and learn all the facets of how the language works, or being able to plug it in easily along the accelerator and being able to maintain that. And then you have different types of applications. You have the typical support USB DAC-MX thingies you plug into a thermocouple, some variables, or have sort of mission-critical applications that has to be maintained for 30 years. And of course, we give them different level of attention.
So the way we address that is having an architecture kind of set to get, up and running with projects is one thing. There's always new areas of research. Like, how many of you got a list of things that you're going to go back and check on websites? Like, I don't think anybody in here knows everything about every single subject that was presenting in these two days. So for those folks that are like saying, I feel constrained because you're only forcing me to work within the constraints of the architecture, there are so many other projects that they can be working on. continuous integration, I want you to figure out how we're going to convince everyone on doing unit testing. We need help with VI Analyzer test. There's always something, and every member of the team that comes on that level has already preferences. So one of the things that I do with my team is we have weekly meetings, and it's a one-to-one. And I always ask them what's working, what needs improvement, and what was your highlight of the week. And I use the highlight of the week to start realizing what are the things that make them tick. And I try to balance their work so they have billable hours and always a couple of hours to work on that thing that makes them tick, that also we as a team can benefit from.
So at Renishaw, similar to, great, can you hear me now? Cool. So at Renishaw, similar to CERN, it's little siloed teams around, and it's kind of similar to Dyson as well. Total members who use LabVIEW is somewhere around 200. Each team might have 3-4 people who do LabVIEW, and the assignment of resources is kind of done in a way that we have a product that we want to try and make and sell. That makes a company the money. So there are different stages of manufacturing which need automating, measurement systems, and all that kind of stuff. So we tend to currently put one person per system down to say, you own this system. So everything that you do is kind of your thing now. So they are kind of in charge of making up the architecture of whatever they feel like. Now, that creates a massive problem when it comes to supportability for the future, for manufacturing services team. So what we've decided to try and do is, yes, you can come with your own architecture, that's completely yours, but you can't transfer it to the other guys until you create a support material for someone else to get trained on the architecture that you've created. So Ben has created one, Rob, if anyone knows the name, Rob Werham, he's created one, I've created a couple, and it's that kind of structure where you're planning again for how it can get supported for the future. Something that I wanted to maybe bring with you guys over here is this structure of putting a person on a project, and like you just said, what if that person wasn't working on a project, they were just working on standardizing only. Is that something that many of you guys do, or you've worked with anyone that does it?
We have some people who work a lot on reuse code and kind of on that standardization, because we find that having a relatively standard framework that everybody learns that's pretty simple is pretty good, because we're more in the long term. Like, we don't as much have this high turnover of people. Most of the employees that have been at VI Technologies have been there for a really long time and plan to stay there. So for us, kind of investing in that onboarding and making sure that they really know that architecture really well is important. But you mentioned about the ownership, and I think that's super important. Like, allowing people to feel like they really have ownership over their projects, like it's theirs and they have space to do what they feel like is right, as long as it's, within reason, of course, that other people will understand it, coding first for humans and then the compiler kind of thing, but yeah.
I think you've raised a good point. I think maybe a lot of the people in this room won't have this problem because you work for consultancies or in one-man band kind of situations. When you work for a company who's driven by profit and money, you are not given the time to put the needs, its kind of structure behind your code. You don't have the time to take one of your core developers or one of your engineers out of projects to actually make the standardization and do the support material, no matter how much we argue with management. That's just not the case. So it's making sure that you have processes in place that support your ideal, knowing that your ideal is a really long way away. You just have to keep going for it. So your experienced guys, the guys that are stuck in the mud, they're the ones that you need to get buy-in from right at the start. Your experienced guys, they're the ones that build the little tools that, as Fab said, they're the ones that build in the little bits that feed in, so the report generation or database connectivity, they're the ones that do that, so they've got ownership of a part of it. And then everyone in the team has then got the ability to train up the new guys, despite the fact that we're not at our ideal and we're not at the point of standardization. And I think that's just something to mention. It's very different when you've got those teams.
So yeah, Velacor is a different thing, but our customers that we coach, where I actually have to go and help the guy that was working by themselves for the last 20 years, and now they all of a sudden have a team of 10 people. It's a different story. I've done a presentation on focusing on technical wealth instead of focusing on technical debt. I think a lot of what you're describing is just making sure that you have the goals met for next week and next month, or maybe next quarter, and that's it. The key is finding what is the value added that management has. For some companies, it's money. For some companies, it's time. There's different, for some companies, it's just doing more with less people. You have to figure out which one is that, and then how to tie that to the business goals of the company. So then you go back from that and put in terms of value on those terms that they understand. Why is it that you need to invest into the standardization and getting the technical wealth for your team? And sometimes you have to pick a small project where maybe they're not looking, and doing all the measurements with these values that we said, and show them the proof is in the pudding. When we do take the time to do this, we go slow so we can go faster.
Yeah, for us, we kind of to ease people into things, we focus quite a lot of attention on training. So it's been our experience that all over Europe, any university, people, they're clever, they know their mathematics, they know the electronics, but they don't know software engineering best practices. And I have this sort of view that for the software engineer, he's really good at documenting his code, it's structured well done. But the moment that person starts doing electronics, it's just hashed out kind of wasp nests of cables that gets into the machine. And the other way around. The electronics or automation engineer sort of neatly configures all the tables and all the cross configuration of the cabling. But then for the software, it's just, yeah, it works. And yeah, we're trying to bridge that gap between the real world that we're living in right now, where you have to do a little bit of everything. You have to be like a one-man army in the automation and physics world for us. So we invested a bit in tools. I heard a lot of people using Atlassian tools here. We also do that a bit. Wiki, making sure that everything is documented, have a template which people can follow. There's a pure minimum, what does your thing do? Can you describe it? Can you? Doesn't work? Does it work now? Yeah, okay. Sorry? Yeah. And then, so we have a training part where there's a bit of feedback. We have a training, we have sort of standardized bit on the MyRio platform because it kind of gives you a bit of everything so that we can test FPGA, we can test DAQs, and we can test sort of multi-layer applications, and we can follow our training. And then we have different tests, so how to integrate on the different levels of the accelerators to the databases, the middleware systems, these things. And we also try to give people a 10 to 20% free time to do whatever they want, so that they can work on a spare time project. So if they have a good idea, maybe it turns into something, maybe something we can use in the future, or just to keep people motivated. And then we do some challenges, hackathons internally, where you hand out prizes, Arduinos or Raspberry Pis and these kind of things.
We also do that. Is this on? Okay. We also do the internal hackathons and find that that's really fun. I think we do it pretty often, and it's great. Also, the thing about having some time to work on something that inspires you. You mentioned it. I've seen it. I read it in a book called Managing Humans. I don't remember who wrote it, but it seems to be a pretty common thread, and you can turn that into reuse code or whatever. It's nice.
I think it's that thing of challenging people at whatever level they're at. So you get newbies. There are some great forums online that give you challenges. I set newbies and experienced guys the same challenges when they come into the team. It gives me a great idea of actually whether they're experienced or not. And if they're a newbie, it gives me a great idea of whether they're going to ask the right questions or whether they're just going to sit there and panic. And then it helps me then figure out how to educate them. But I think that challenging continuously is definitely a good idea. And just, if you've got a problem that needs solving, why not raise it to the whole team?
The think on the projects that are not related to revenue or to what you do, but it's just like the thing you did with Python and LabVIEW and something, they might not have had a customer. One of the things we do is we treat those projects as if it was a customer project. So when we are balancing out, because we manage multiple projects at the same time, if we are not serving our internal projects, we treat it as if we are failing one of our customers. So Delacorp is one of our customers. So you guys got DQMH because Delacorp was one of our customers and we needed to deliver that. So one thing to, and it's hard, right? Because you need to add like a project number, whatever tracking you're doing in Jira or whatever, you need to check that those internal projects are also being served.
I think there was another book that I think it was someone from the community that recommended it to me called Drive by Daniel Pink. And once I read that, we started doing things like FedEx Days and all that as well. Just a show of hands quickly before everyone falls asleep. How many of you guys do something like that, 10%, 20% of your time in the week sort of thing, where you do whatever you want? Let's do official first. Okay. And unofficially? Okay. So why do we not get the buy-in to get it done officially? Time pressure, work pressure. Okay.
Meeting deadlines, delivery.
Just to respond from like my perspective, my manager understands LabVIEW and test and measurement. The manager above him understands test and measurement, and the guy above him understands test and measurement, but they do not understand the nitty-gritty of what we're doing. And actually saying to them we need 3 weeks to, put ourselves in isolation and achieve something is just not something that fits anywhere in the project plan. They don't have control over project timelines. They can kind of feedback, but that's not controlled by, if you work in a matrix structure, then you don't have that opportunity. There are a few teams around in Dyson that do get the opportunity, and I think it's one of those things that when it's proved in a small isolated area, people see the benefits and then you can roll it out.
Just to follow up, for those of you who said that you work on unofficially, how many of you have been able to give that unofficial results of your labor back to the company? Okay, did you go back and sell how much time you spent on it? Or did you just give it away? See, that's the thing. That's the thing, is I hear, and I don't know where Luis is, but I was talking to Luis yesterday, and he spent I don't know how many weekends and everything, and I'm like, and did you tell them how much money you saved them, right? Because if this had been your project, they would have paid you for this time. My first boss in Mexico told me this. It's not enough to lay the eggs. The chicken, the hen, has to make all this noise to make sure the farmer knows that there's a new egg and that it was she that laid it. If you are not telling that value that you're giving back, how are they going to know that they need to give you this time? So,
I think the hen needs to find a new farmer.
Can be automated. Well, one other thing we do is we have a slot reserved every Thursday, sort of a holy time, after 2 o'clock on Thursdays, which is reserved for code reviews or what we call raid routes. So it's just somebody presenting something new or fancy they've come up with. We don't do it every week, but when there's something new to
In academia world, I don't know everywhere or in some places, there is a concept of library day. This is day when you go wherever it's supposed to you go to library and learn yourself.
I'll do that.
very much. It was a very in-depth answer to the question.
Did we answer the question?
Yes, and much more. Shall we move on to another question, or has the audience got a question? No. Should you let a newbie write bad code on work time if you know it's going nowhere? Are you going to have to rework it? It doesn't fit the rules, but they are going to learn a lot while they're doing it.
Absolutely, yes.
Good answer.
You need the pain of reworking it.
Or someone else might have to rework it.
But you should also be available for questions and make sure that they know that you can help.
I think engineers inherently learn from mistakes. If you don't give them time to learn from their mistakes, they will parrot things, and then they will never actually be able to achieve anything without support.
They might not know why also, why you just say, oh, you should do this, and they'll say, I know I should do this, but I don't know why.
I think the hard one here is like there's things that you know they're gonna get the learning experience really quickly. There are other ones, like I was saying yesterday with unit testing, where they're not gonna get it until like months from now. So on those ones, or VI Analyzer. So for those ones, I manufacture the experience. So if we do a code review, I might hide a couple of things that only VI Analyzer would find. I might, do things like that. And they know that I'm going to be tricking them. But that's how people get used to it. The other thing that we did with a customer of mine, and this was a complete accident. We were doing an audit for them and trying to figure out where their processes were at. And part of the work with them is we give them the tools, because I understand that they cannot wait 3 months until we're done with the report. So we give them the tools so they can start using them while we're interviewing the team and we're interviewing their internal customers and all that. And for whatever reason, they left the newbie to be interviewed at the end. And I didn't know he was the newbie. But I started asking all the questions. And he's like, yeah, of course we do code reviews. Yes, of course we use VI Analyzer. Yes, of course we do unit testing. And I was like, this is not matching any of the other people. So I hang up with him and I call my customer and I'm like, is this the new guy? And he's like, yes. Are you using him as a guinea pig? And he starts laughing and he's like, yes. So what happened was there was a bunch of silos in the company and they just couldn't agree to standardize. So what this guy came up with a brilliant idea that he was going to put this guy to do a project from beginning to end using all the new processes and tools. So what started happening is the rest of the team said, the new guy is smart, but he's not much more smarter than us. So how come he's picking up on LabVIEW so fast? How come his code is passing all these tests? How come the code reviews are going so well? And just the guy that set up the poor new guy to do this was like, because he's following the processes. So that's what got buy-in. So you're not gonna get that opportunity. One where they let the guy fail to learn, but they also use him to get the sticks in the mud, you call them, to bend.
So one of the things I did with, it was an intern when he started, was in the first week, Lego Mindstorms, let them play with Lego Mindstorms. And at least by the end of the week, he needed to be able to demonstrate to my 2 sons, I would take them to work and say, if my kids go home happy on that day, he's going to get past his probation and he's allowed to stay. Obviously, I was not going to kick him out if he failed, but they came in, they had a little line follower going, and I was kind of, he hadn't done any LabVIEW before, so he integrated the Lego Mindstorms with LabVIEW and found a way to do it. So play games, play little things here and there. It works, I think.
We have a small thing we do from time to time. I wish I was more consistent on it, but it's that if somebody's made a release of a project, it's been put into production, then we get somebody who has never seen it before to test out the documentation installation on a clean system. Can they manage to get it up and running within a reasonable time? So that if the customer calls and, hey, my machine just burned, can you come and set up a new one? Take one of the spares and get it running. And that has been very helpful because you're in your own mindset, you write your documentation, and when you forget 90% of the little things you did at the beginning, and yeah.
That's just going to kind of tie up what you guys have said, I think, and going back to the previous thing, you need to challenge everyone in the team. And there's some really good ways of doing that. I think Fab's kind of hinted at that by manufacturing these kind of things. But I think if you are sensible about how you create your challenges, you can do that within that. And that's something I've done in the last year with the more experienced guys, or the guys that have been doing LabVIEW for 1.5 years, 2 years. We have undergraduates, so 18-year-olds coming through our team. And I get all of the experienced guys to create a new demo every 4 months for those undergraduates. So they get a day to create a demo with hardware, with a UI, and make it scalable so they can show the undergrads how to add features as they're going. And it really kind of, they like doing that. It gives them a challenge. We don't get the opportunity to do this 10-20% thing. That's their 10-20%.
For those of you guys that are doing CI, here's some goals. This is a crazy thing that Google does. When they hire someone, that person needs to be putting something in production code during the first week. And if something fails in the entire process, it's not his fault. It's the fault of the process. So that's his first project, is to give that feedback back, because otherwise, as a company, we failed on not having the process. So one of the things we do at Delacorp is the first project everybody has to go through is do the test plan for the QMH. And that's where we get the feedback of the things that are not working. So
I think, sort of talking about mistakes, but our biggest challenge is not really within the team. It's more with our users, our different physicists, engineers that use LabVIEW, and try to encourage them to use best practices and concepts that we might have developed, or that is just common practice in the programming world. That can take a lot of time to convince. Sort of, why should I change? It already works. I don't have time, or don't have the capacity, or the person has left. There are a lot of excuses out there. But this, we spent a lot of time sort of in the reviews. We also invite them all to do code reviews with us. Some people catch on to it and find it really helpful. Others, it's just nah.
We find the same thing.
Please don't.
I'm thinking, a new member comes to a team, and this new member must be somehow included in the team, adjust. Would you agree or disagree that more experience sometimes gives more understanding that this person, for this person, he or she understands better that he or she must adjust? That juniors believe much more in their perfection.
Clean book versus book that already has some writing on it.
Yes, something like that.
Wait, I didn't understand the question.
So what's the difference between, let me see if I understood, what's the difference between bringing a new guy that has like no experience versus getting a buy-in?
New guy said, I got best marks in university, I know everything.
Oh, that guy.
I often have the opposite experience, but
I think you manufacture one of Fab's things and prove them that they're not right.
Okay, when I come to be a full-time LabVIEW consultant, I was very lucky because there was economical crisis. So I came to Endeavor, many knows name of this company. It's developers of Goop. And I came and there were no projects. And I had something like 10-15 years of LabVIEW experience back of me. I had nothing to do, but I had time to understand what in this company is considered as good practice. I could work with different approaches. I had experience, but still I had possibility. Would I get a project immediately? Certainly my rating inside company would be much worse, simply because I would use some other approaches.
I think for us, we usually hire people specific for a project, so it's often hard to get that kind of freedom to explore what are the missing holes, even for people with experience. That's a good point. Any other questions?
No, I think there's still some for that question. Okay. Yeah, the best way to... Brian Powell has a presentation that's called The Humble Programmer. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend it. And again, goes back to my definition of a good programmer. So most of the time, the fact that I have that qualifier, that an average programmer, which could be me, needs to be able to support your code, that normally lowers a little bit of that I know everything type of thing. And putting some of the traps of, oh, you didn't catch this, this is why we run BI Analyzer and stuff.
It's also something to be wary of when hiring, I think. Like, you want to hire someone that doesn't already think that they know everything, because you can't fill a cup that's already full.
I guess on this, while we're talking about how we assess a newbie, how do you do that in the first place? So within an interview setting, when someone says that they're a LabVIEW programmer, how do you best assess that in an interview? Would you give them a test, or how would you do that?
I think it's useful to have a technical interview and have a relatively standardized one. You're gonna sit there with somebody who's experienced and watch them struggle through things, and also watch how they handle those struggles, because it's not just about how they code it.
I mean, for me, that's what the probation time is for as well. I mean, you see that the qualifications match. There's a good chemistry during a normal interview, but then you have a probation time where you can test people in the field.
Do you actually get rid of people after probation?
Not very often, but it does happen. But we have contracts.
I'm just going to say I tend to do the technical side of interviews for my team, and that's usually a half-hour phone. I don't get the luxury of them being in front of me with LabVIEW. I start with CLAD-based questions and very quickly figure out if I can go on to more kind of CLD resit kind of style questions, CLA resit questions, and that's because it's over the phone. That's all I have, but it does give you a good idea of the concepts. And if they know the concepts and they don't know LabVIEW, then at least they know software best practices and programming.
There is a book called Joy Inc., and it says kindergarten skills. If somebody already doesn't come with those, you cannot teach them. Knowing how to share, ask for permission. I mean, there's all sorts of things. LabVIEW I can teach. Those things I cannot. And I have figured out that we are also a small company, so I don't have, like when I went to NI, to work for NI, I had like a whole day of interviews, so I don't have that. So what we do is we do a 40-hour trial, and we are evaluating both the technical aspect and also the chemistry. Can we work together? And I always tell them it goes both ways. Not everyone likes to work with me. I wonder why. So at the end, we just part as good friends, and they get something out of it. They learn something. I learn something, and we all move along. But yeah, the probation period, I think anybody can fake a persona during an interview. It's a lot harder during a project.
I think what you said is really important. You can teach anybody LabVIEW, but you can't teach everybody those kindergarten skills. That's like...
Yes, minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah, Darren?
Yeah, going back to what you said about you have a fake program kind of thing that you have to make. If I went for an interview with Delacorp or VI Tech or whatever, and Jeffrey said, yeah, fill in this program for me, I'd tell him to do one, because for me it's a complete waste of, you're trying to, it's kind of, they're accusing you of lying, if you like. You go in and say, yeah, you got your CLA, blah, 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 and you say, yeah, but fill in this program. Where do you divide the line between...
What do you mean of filling this program? I don't.
You said you do like a demo project, like do a practical, like...
No. I put them to do something that we actually is going to use.
No, I don't think it was you. I think somebody else said that you do make an actual program.
Oh, yeah,
So
no.
what weight do you put behind I can do LabVIEW, I'm a CLA, CLD, whatever? What weight do you put behind
do we
that?
take into consideration the certification just opens the door to actually having an interview, to work, but you have to show what's behind that certification on that 40-hour trial period.
I'm asking this because it leads on to my presentation next.
So on the interview process thing, so what I try to do is if someone's got a certification already, I kind of expect a certain level. My interviews for the technical side of things could last anywhere between an hour to 2 hours, where I sit, like you said, sit right beside them and give them a few tasks. Some of it is more free. You can do whatever you want. I've given them a list of tasks I'd like, they're very specific. So that's just kind of see how good are they at just following specification, just to get it done. And then the second half of that is more open questions. And they're still LabVIEW based. There's still a problem that you need to solve. You need to think about an algorithm. And that's another part. And the third part to that is how do they perform under pressure? And I don't tell them about the time aspect of any of this. I'm recording time the whole time. But in the last part, I just say, okay, well, now I'm going to tell you, you have 15 minutes to do this. And then it's then observing whether to use quick drop or not, what, how their framework is in terms of solving the problem, and get a little bit of an insight. Again, that doesn't tell you exactly if they fit anything or not. Culture is quite a big thing for me personally. If they come into the team and they don't fit the culture and they have, their own ideas about how the culture should be, it kind of creates a resistance and it disturbs the team as it might be. So yeah, I think I quite value the culture. And then like you said, Fab, you can teach them LabVIEW.
Yeah, going off of that, I think you see more in a technical interview than just how they perform technically. Like you see how they interact and how they approach these problems. You see how they think about things. You see, like you said, how they perform under pressure is really important, especially if you're doing consulting or any job really. And I think that's super crucial, and it really tells a lot about the person. And then you can see that cultural fit or personal fit or whatever.
So in my experience, the certification, again, just shows me that they have enough interest in LabVIEW to sit through a 4-hour exam. That's it. Because unfortunately, you can pass, for example, the CLD with a state machine, so they might not know anything about queues. One thing I don't like is doing whiteboard technical interviews. People are not going to be working on the whiteboard, right? They're going to be doing the code. If they are using the whiteboard to do the modeling and all that, of course, that's really close to my heart, and they're already in. But yeah, I'm looking for how are we going to work as a team. And when I'm coaching companies on how to hire people, I say, if you can actually bring them in one day, if you cannot afford, because different countries have different contract agreements, so sometimes they cannot do the probation thing or the trial. If you can have them on the interview day, come in and sit in with one of the team members or a couple of the team members and work with them on a project, like body programming, that I think you get more from that than going into a conference room and asking them questions. So.
We got just under 2 minutes left for that one question.
Get the question asked.
Another aspect of giving a project to somebody to do, addressing Darren's comment, is seeing how much energy he's willing to put into the whole thing. If he's trying to really engage with it and solve it, or if he's just fed up and saying, no, that's too much work, what's the point of that? So that really makes a big difference, I think.
Just to add to that, this is for an experienced or stuck in the mud developer, then it's pretty easy to see if they actually do documentation and follow best practices, which I've noticed generally is not the case.
Do you have any other questions?
I do, if you've got 56 seconds. A stick in the mud on that same thing can produce excellent work, but they're working outside your architecture. Do you let them get on with it, or do you beat them with a stick and get them to bend to your rule?
I think you have to do a bit of both. They're stuck in the mud, but they've probably got that way because they're good at what they're doing. They will have value to add. Even if you've got an architecture you've been using for 10 years, they will have value to add. They will be able to suggest new ways of doing things. They might have tried a new technology you haven't done. You have to go both ways. You have to explain to them, maybe you don't use the active framework because you have a team of a lot of new developers and you've got, turning over LabVIEW developers every 4 months, then you're not going to be able to teach them an active framework. It's just not going to happen. So actually explaining the reasoning behind why you've made those choices and trying to get them to then maybe come up with an alternative to why you've come up with that solution.
So carry on.
You only have one mic now. Yeah. No. Also, we're also faced with a lot of people that are not necessarily there to do LabVIEW development. So, many cases we might take over the project and sort of bring it up to standard and let them do what they do best, whether it's in the field of RF or cryogenics or whatever they're doing in physics and studying and analysis. So there's a bit of a mix there. But everybody in the team has to get to a certain standard, but then for the rest of the community, we try as best to just teach and make people happy with what they're doing. You can't really force people too much because they're just going to stop doing it.
Well, thank you very much for joining the panel. That's been really insightful, I think. So give them a round of applause.